Hello there. Here's a question. Just how do you design to improve life? Well, thankfully in this session, some of our most successful alumni, Wong from Food New York and Akarsu from Laerdal Medical, will discuss their learnings and design principles to help us better answer the question.
Hi everyone, welcome to our Designers Masterclass. We talk a lot about design and more than often what we're very used to is seeing a finished product or solution in all its glory. And often as an audience, we're not seeing the boiler room, the inner workings, the process itself in how designers are actually working. Today, we're going to have a discussion about the process itself and see something that's less abstract to better understand how practitioners are using design methods in their own work. So, of course, designing involves many decisions, considerations, tests, and inquiries. And we hope this event is a great way to open our minds in the how things get created beyond just seeing the finished product. I'm really pleased to introduce you to Cansu Akarsu and to Wong, both representing alumni of Index Awards. Before I introduce our guests today, as you may have seen on our social media channels this afternoon, our designers today have shared what their workstations look like, and we encourage you to also do the same. So during this event, send us a photo of it to us on Instagram or tag us in your post. And of course, you know, what we'd like to do is also just show you a little sneak preview of what Dong and Cansu's work environments look like. I mean, after all these months of not traveling, this was actually a great way to explore and to get that sort of sneak preview of these studios. So, so take it away. We're going to show you Cansu's maker studio at Laerdal.
Hi everyone. My name is Cansu and I'm heading up healthcare education at Laerdal. We are in Stavanger, Norway, in one of our makerspaces, and here we design life-saving solutions to educate the next generation of healthcare professionals community. And I'm in one of our makerspaces, and this is typically where we design and develop things. It might be messy, but great things happen here.
Fantastic. We've seen messier studios, Cansu. Thank you for joining us. And Dong, let's see what your space looks like.
Morning. So I figured I could take you on a tour of my walk to the office. I live in these big co-op buildings you can see behind me in Lower East Side in Manhattan. And I'm pretty much just walking straight west that way. So I'll just walk you through it. So this is the part where Lower East Side basically transitions into Chinatown. You can see probably some Chinese writing up there. Over there is Times Square, which I think every day either starts with a coffee or ends with a drink, probably over there. But we'll go this way and keep walking over there. Okay, so we're pretty much in the middle of Chinatown now. My good friend Jess lives somewhere up there. Jess. And that mall under the bridge has some of the best dumplings in the basement I've ever had. Our office is up in that building there. The office, mahjong set, Zoom table, just a table for model making and just general hanging out, doing work, a couple computers, although generally we're trying to get everybody to sit open and out. Models of some of the projects. Sorry, it's so crooked. And otherwise, the office is nice. It's not that big, but it has very nice views. You can see out to a couple bridges over there, a couple of bridges, and an absolutely terrible tower over here. And then out this dirty window, you can see a bit of the river. More or less there, actually a little bit over here, is where Plus Pool, one of our projects, will go in a few years. So that's the office.
Wow, thank you for that walk to work. Really sensory overload there, seeing you know, the little bartering happening on the streets, and also just a nice impression to see, you know, what inspires you, what details you see on your way to work, and you know, of course, that sparks creativity. Super. So what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce Cansu to the digital floor and ask you to introduce yourself, and of course dive straight into the project that you're working on right now. So welcome, Cansu.
Yes, super. How does it look? Okay, super. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Cansu, as Liza mentioned, and I'm heading up the healthcare education segment at Laerdal. So here at Laerdal, we work towards helping save lives. And the key word here is really helping. We develop training and quality improvement for lifesavers, nurses, midwives, doctors, and other healthcare workers to care for their patients. So on the topic of the, oh, did it move? Nope. Yes. So on the topic of the showing typical workplaces, here is a picture from the Malawi maternity ward, Blantyre Hospital, which really represents an ideal environment where design happens. And I've been working within maternal and newborn care for several years, and we have had the chance to meet and collaborate with midwives, mothers, and their precious babies in order to do the design work. So in, you know, studio space, you know, is an excellent place to synthesize information, but it's really out in the field that design takes place. And this is really how collaboration leads to developing solutions. And here you see the Natalie collection. It's a bundle of training and clinical products that tackle the most common life-threatening emergencies at birth. And in 2013, we were proud to win the Index Award with the Natalie collection. So many people refer to the Natalie collection as life-saving products, but I want to emphasize that it's really not the products that save lives, it's the people, the skilled heroes that we have, the lifesavers out there, and here in this case, birth attendants that save lives. And this project has been, you know, scaled up since 2013 to train 500,000 birth attendants. That has been our focus. Yeah.
Super. And so, John, welcome you to the digital stage here. Introduce yourself and show us some things that you're working on right now.
Sure. My mouse is getting stuck. But thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here back at Index and to be with Cansu. And I'll just very quickly through some of our work. So the office is called Food New York. We're basically an architecture office. But internally, we like to call ourselves an environmental design studio. A lot of the work deals very specifically with a natural resource that might be available on site, whether it's the open air and the wind, in both these cases for different kind of housing projects, the river that we're trying to bridge across, or if we're working in a space that doesn't really have, let's say, an inherent environment to work with. This was a stage design for Kanye West's the Yeezus tour back in 2013, I think. And so since there wasn't a natural environment within all these stadiums, we basically brought in a mountain that traveled around the US and a giant moon, basically. We continued to work with him for a little while, and this was kind of the start of the office, working with him and designing him and Kim's house and a number of different residences for them. And that led into a series of retail projects through Kanye, but also through, at the time, his creative director, Virgil Abloh, who's now kind of a lead in design and fashion around the world. But we did a number of his Off-White stores, and like this is the first one we did in Hong Kong. And really the only concept here was taking a piece of a public park that was more or less across the street and introducing it to the front of the store so that in this really heavy shopping environment, there was a place of rest. There was a place that wasn't about shopping, even in just a small bit. But we've kind of continued that idea through a number of different projects. But a lot of it is either opening up to the environment around there or creating whole new environments within. This is a bathhouse that we're working on down in the Caribbean. The entire idea is that you're basically carving your way through a giant hedge and discovering all these different ways to bathe or relax or touch water in new ways, let's say. This is a proposal in Chinatown, again, just getting up in the air and seeing the view. A brand new project also down in the Caribbean for a hotel and residence. And this one was, we basically took an empty parking lot and rewilded it, or starting to rewild it, basically planting an entirely new jungle, trying to bring back a habitation that was there before. And finally, which is not really design, but we started a radio show a couple years ago. It's very stop-start, but it's maybe a few weeks a year, called Food Radio, and very similar to, I think, the index discussion day was all about trying to understand how people worked. This specific series was about how people made money doing creative work. And it was targeted to Chinatown kids, just to show that you could actually be a creative and have a life. And then finally, this is what got us here, I think, in the first place. It's called Plus Cool. It was mentioned in the studio visit video, and this is what introduced us, I suppose, to Index many years ago. But I'm incredibly happy that it's also brought us kind of back full circle. This now is in basically right off of Chinatown. My office is just to the left of this photo. My house is just behind these buildings. And this is the site that we'll be at with all things going well, hopefully in a couple years. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much for that. And I'm really happy to see, obviously these references to the Index Awards of the past. I mean, of course, it takes time for designs to evolve, and of course, this is also part of the discussion is, these are processes that do need time. They do need space to mature, as we do as people as well. And and of course, I remember the both of you when I met you for the first time, Cansu in 2011, Dong in 2013, and and I've just watched your careers flourish. So I'm inviting you here for a little discussion about design processes. We'll have a few Q&As here, and of course, dip into each other's answers, or if you've got curious things that you want to ask each other. I mean, of course, it would be wonderful to have you here in person, but we're just going to do this digitally. But I'm going to just jump in straight away with you, Dom. So when you're creating solutions, and this could be from the conceptual, and you showed us a lot of projects that really, really started on a conceptual basis, right through to something super tangible, and that's sort of the retailing and the environment there. How do you start that design process?
The basic process is always a period of research. I guess it's not really that surprising, but the research, I think, for Hess has shifted. Originally, it was a lot of research in program. It's very common with architects to look at obviously usage and how people move through the space and combining different usages in there. And I think it's shifted lately into more environment, and even specifically trying to identify, it's really dumb in a lot of ways, like what that natural environment is either missing in the site or is that we can open up to at that site. And we found, I think we can use that to touch on so many problems that we're going to encounter throughout each project. And that's such a universal thing. And something we noticed also throughout last year was just literally opening up spaces, literally opening a window, opening up a door, getting rid of a facade was actually very useful even from a health point of view, just getting more natural airflow through a space. So that's generally how we start. I think it's quite visceral, as opposed to, let's say, academic oftentimes, but it is kind of feeling what sort of environment is around.
Cansu, I saw you nodding there earlier. I mean, similarly, posing the same question to you when you're starting or generating ideas for your design process. I mean, what's your recipe? How do you get started on creating?
Typically there might be a trigger that someone actually even mentioned to you, either when you're in a visiting the people that you serve, or even coming from experts, let's say doctors and nurses who maybe they've just come up with an idea, or one of our close partners might have suggested a solution. But actually, taking that maybe concrete idea or a solution that people come to you with, and really turning that into a broader question to explore further. That's the research part, the framing, the research part that I want to emphasize to the designers out there. Maybe someone might have, and in our case, in a few years ago, we were asked if you could make a weighing scale and a breast pump. But when we discovered further, what does it take to improve the lives of small babies, premature and low birth weight babies, we actually found out that it wasn't really those two solutions. So taking some of the concrete suggestions, turning that into what are the problems that those solutions that people suggest to us try to solve, and then asking those questions, and further on, potentially it leads to other solutions, such as a feeding device that we developed.
Fascinating. So actually, earlier you mentioned, Dong, about just the kind of the need for just opening that door or that window, and that has sort of a great metaphoric value now that we've all experienced the pandemic. I have a question for you, Cansu. I mean, again, in this context of understanding your context and really knowing who you're designing for, it's crucial. It's such an important part of the designer's toolbox. How complicated has it been without traveling and conducting research in the field during the pandemic?
Horrible. No, it's not. No, not the case. Actually, it really pushes you to be a bit more efficient in the way you do research. In two methods that I'm going to show later, we're going to see digital ways to explore our people's everyday lives. But some of the methods that we used were actually one that you have asked us to do, which is, can you document your everyday environment? And we've used that with our users as well, where they have taken us to a tour of their environment and sent us recordings. So I think it has made digital way of sharing even more applicable, accessible, and we forced ourselves to be very cost effective when we do research these days.
Yeah. Dong, actually, I mean, you mentioned and showed a project in the Caribbean. I'm assuming that development process took place during the pandemic as well. I mean, again, the same question to you. I mean, how has it been trying to conduct that research and get an understanding of who your client is and the context that you're designing in?
Yeah, similarly, it's been really difficult. And I think for the longest time, and I'm still trying to work through where it's going to land, but it felt like a real detriment to the projects. Because we're designing things that are obviously you experience in person. So understanding what a place is like before you even come up with an ideas was so key. Even dumb things like how humid it is, where the wind pattern is coming from. But because we haven't been able to go to a lot of these sites in person, it also means that we're very much more reliant on locals telling us what their impressions of the environment is. And I realized that actually that's even more essential in a lot of ways, because obviously not only are they the ones using it, but they will have a much deeper understanding of what the place is like. And so it's I miss having your kind of own intuition reading of it, but actually it's been I think it's really helpful for us and forcibly to actually rely on local knowledge in a way that we hadn't before. And I think ideally that only makes our projects better.
Yeah. I mean, I look forward to seeing some of those techniques later on, Cansu. But actually, I mean, I have a question. I mean, it's very, very broad here. And of course, again, Dong, in your presentation, you showed quite a varied selection of projects that you've worked on. How do you live up to the creative expectations of your clients? And you've have very varied clients. You mentioned Kanye West and Virgil Abloh, and you're designing swimming baths for the city harbor. So I mean, how how is it to meet the expectations of these different types of clients?
It's funny. I've actually never really thought of it that way, or thought of that really in terms of meeting their expectations. Obviously, their expectations are incredibly high. That's never in doubt. Their level of creativity and the sharpness of their eyes and visions across a number of clients we have, not just with the famous ones, but is really, really high. If anything, I think we've always looked at it as a real privilege that, you know, if you collaborate with anybody that's really involved with the design process, your projects are just going to get better. And so that's always been really exciting. It's actually oftentimes harder to work with a client who is very not engaged or is waiting for you just to deliver something at the end of the project. Because I think we're pretty good, but you know, our work gets better when someone else is also bouncing better ideas back at us. So it's never felt really that we're not meeting expectations. It's more, if there's any disappointment, sometimes it's that we're sort of left to our own devices a little too much sometimes.
Yeah. Cool. Cansu, I mean, so the work that you're doing with Laerdal, and of course this is, I mean, knowing your sort of designer background as well, you've always been very focused on social impact. Designing for a larger mission can have an urgency to it. So, I mean, in this case, the work that you're doing carries quite a huge responsibility, and the approach has critical importance attached to it, right? So in Laerdal's case, this is a matter of life or death in some of the solutions that you're designing. You know, how do you tackle that? How do you go about like designing processes where you know this is actually life or death situation?
Maybe my answer is also building on Dong's answer a little bit here. It's about how much you invite the partners and the collaborators that you're designing with. It's really not our sole responsibility, but maybe the responsibility that we play as designers is how much we are engaging people to participate in design. So, and even as a company, I mean, the healthcare system is huge, right? It's really a small piece of the puzzle that we try to fill by supporting and empowering the healthcare professionals out there. And everyone really needs to do their job to the best extent, which they do. We have all seen in the pandemic how much it has challenged the healthcare system there. So not just taking on the job of designing to improve life seriously, but also sharing it with the people that you design with. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pandemic stretched us in many ways, and part of that is also understanding the problem. It comes back to what both of you mentioned earlier on in terms of the research phases, right? So just as much understanding the problem and getting to the fact is part of the creating in itself. What's the hardest part? And this is actually for the both of you. So what's the hardest part of creating and getting that started? I'm looking at you, Cansu.
Oh dear.
Oh dear.
Honestly, it's not really that hard. I don't know what Dong will say. It's really not that hard when you collaborate. I would say participatory design is something that has, you know, now everyone is really engaged. I feel that there's a different vibe than maybe 10 years ago when design thinking was maybe starting to be mainstream. And now if you actually approach people out there to participate, to come and join workshops, it's so much more engagement that I see. And even digitally, now that actually people don't have to travel, yes, everyone is willing to pop on a call and run a workshop with us. So I think maybe the difficulty is really to choose where to focus, I would say, because there's so many possible problems that we are solving, isn't it, Dom? I mean, how do you choose what projects to work on?
I mean, that's definitely a hard thing, and even what kind of projects. Yeah, exactly. I think where you want to spend your energy, especially with projects that can be very diverse. I think related to that, because there's so many things to potentially look at, potentially study and design for, it's also architecture especially is very slow. So in the long time frame from like concept and design to construction, I think one of the hardest things, which is probably also one of the most boring, is maintaining your design throughout, because constantly there's going to be things that come up, other ideas that come up, let alone budget and schedule problems, that it always feels like a fight to maintain a core of your project while things are either being added or chipped away. And it's where I feel like a lot of the best design firms are very incredible at, I mean, I don't see everybody's process, but maintaining a clarity throughout that whole thing. I mean, some of these projects, I mean, the pool is 10 years, but some of these projects typically can take 2 or 3 years just in the design phases, and opinions change, feelings change, materials change, priorities change a lot. So trying to maintain that kind of consistency can be quite exhausting.
Wow, fantastic. Well, thank you for that. I think that's time's up on the questions here. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to invite Cansu to share some exercises that you're using. You mentioned them earlier on, and I think we're curious to sort of like get to the nitty-gritty here. So, Cansu, if you want to share some slides with us.
I am super excited to bring you into the kitchen here. Yeah. Okay, so today there will be 2 design techniques that I'll share with you, but I want to give you some context first, and would like to introduce you to the healthcare education world that I'm currently leading at Laerdal, and just I want to meet you one of our people that we serve, who is Ashley. And as a nurse resident some years ago, she was able to recognize a cardiac arrest. She was able to lead and deliver CPR and help a patient survive. So to put it in context of what that helping save lives means, our job is really in the healthcare education world to help more Ashleys deliver more quality care. And here, yeah, that's where, yeah. So the future that we're working towards is where education happens anytime and anywhere. Students practice on their own with their peers in teams, and sometimes they make mistakes and they get instant feedback about exactly how to improve. On the other hand, the educators, they have access to insights on each and every student, so they are more informed about the student progress, and if the student struggles, then they're able to catch them before they fall. So what you see here is really a future vision that we have built. And I want you to look at it a little bit critically when I share this vision with you. So what was wrong with what I shared with you just now? The issue was that it was very glossy. It looked really perfect. And when you set the bold visions that we set in our company, such as, you know, helping save 1 million more lives every year by 2030, and when you're designing for such a long-term vision like 2030, and you will be very familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals looking at 2030 as well, it's quite tempting to think of that future as that perfect future. So the first technique I will show you is aiming to uncover the real lives of the people that we will be serving in 2030. So it's called Future Diaries. And it's all about imagining a future everyday life of a person. And this is a super simple exercise that any one of you can practice. And we've been practicing at a high scale in our company. So it's about creating the imperfect life of the future that we serve. And what we did was to create some user cards, which had a name and just a bit of a context. So maybe a profession and a part of the world. And you could even add an age if you would like to. And all the other details could be filled by a participant who is going through this exercise. We also wanted to add a trigger statement here, which is in this case, 2030 medical errors as we once knew them do not exist. So it doesn't even say they don't exist. Maybe they exist in one form, but not as we know it. And in this exercise, super simple, you simply ask the participants to write a page of a diary of this person. And you could even do it for, 3 different days over a few months. So you can really build on this exercise. And if you ask the participants to imagine this everyday life, of course, what you would write in a diary are reflections from that everyday. So in this case, Michael wrote, "Dear diary, I had my first patient today. It was tough, and I was very nervous. I forgot that I would be recorded, and after listening to myself, I realized I have a lot to improve on, and so on. So you can see that there are glimpses of ideas here as well. So it's also an idea generation tool as you write a diary. So we also added, as a follow-up of these diaries, can we actually picture these worlds? So the diaries really inspired us to think further on. Maybe Michael was going through a debrief session, something was recorded, and then he was asked to discuss it with his team. So it's both to understand the complexity and the imperfect life of Michael, but also help us come up with ideas for that future. And then when you then also look at the everyday life critically, it really enforces you to think about even more care for example, in this case, privacy issues and concerns that people would have. So we have run this exercise both, within the design discipline, but also this is what you see is a strategy session with participants coming from worldwide organizations across Laerdal. And imagine this group of, I think it was 50-ish people, and everybody were given a person's name and a context, and everyone wrote diaries, and we were reading it out loud throughout the 2 days of workshop. So it's a powerful tool. It's a super simple tool. So if you want to scale it in the company or in the or a school, if you're working in a school, it's super powerful tool. So now we went through designing for the future for people who do not necessarily have those lives yet. But of course, going forward, we also look at how do we design for here and now. And the second method that I'm going to show you, I will actually invite one of my designers, colleagues in Copenhagen, and we pre-recorded a session for you here where she's presenting a super cool method that we've been using to understand everyday life of nurses.
Hi everyone, my name is Ina and I would like to talk about a tool called Through the Daily Lives. And it's an exercise that's really about sitting down with the person you designed for and trying to understand who they are, what their life is, what are their surroundings, and so on. So how do you get to know a person you don't know? One way could be to truly to understand their daily activities, what do they do hour to hour, right? But also who are they interacting with? The people they work for, people they work, they teach, and so on. Also, it's nice to ask what they do in their free time, and also what are their past and what is their future. And this exercise was a lot about relationship building, and relationships building is about transparency. So I decided to conduct this interview in this form that I share my screen while I'm taking notes, and the person that I'm interviewing is seeing what I'm doing. And so I let them correct me. I let them delete stuff if they didn't want something. I let them see my mistakes. And I also would zoom out and really, ask them if this is something that they feel comfortable with or not as a representation. I want to share this example where I'm interviewing a nurse educator and we're mapping out her daily activities, where she also talks about relationships with people and her responsibilities.
At lunchtime and then at 4 p.m., usually the facilitators will debrief. So I will connect with my facilitators, and then I'll usually lead like a very informal debrief about how the day went, what went well, any students that were absent, just so that we're aware of like the administration component of it. And then I check in with my facilitators at 4 o'clock, and I usually check in with them at 12 o'clock too, just to make sure that, things are moving and that the computers are working and that the program's working and there's no complaints or no concerns that we need to be concerned about.
So the two of us, we mapped out her days and her relationship and the other things, and we were really happy with it and had an understanding, but there were so many other people who would like to meet her, right? And this format wasn't really the best to share. So I had to consolidate the interview into this format, which still everything I noted down and we mapped out together is represented there. And also the practice that I started doing is I shared back with her this final outcome. So I sent it back to her and said, are you okay with this? Is this a good representation? And because I knew in the back of my head that I'm going to do this, I wrote it very differently. I didn't summarize her into categories or give her nicknames. And I tried to be very respectful in the way I conduct things. Here you see an overview of how her day was consolidated. So it's also trying to kind of really take her perspective and showing it into this calendar format. So this exercise is really about relationship building and therefore about transparency. So really how you conduct the interview, or you sharing your screen and showing everything you write down, but also sending it back at the end and being very clear about what information from this interview you took. And this exercise is not, it's not a product I interviewed her about a user test. It was really about her, but of course with the hope to make better, help her with our products in the future. And now Cansu is going to talk a little bit more about how we want to scale up this approach in our company.
I am not sure if all of that was true, but maybe the two things that I'm going to emphasize from the method that Ina shared was that you're really moving away from thinking about persona and stereotyping people into truly understanding their personality, their everyday challenges, and their relationships. And if there was one thing that you can take away from this video was to have transparency of the way you document people's lives. And it will not just, allow you to be slightly more respectful in the way you're, portraying them, but also help you, have relationships with them that you can go back to them later on. And in this case, the people that Ina was documenting, they actually wanted the way the calendar view and the way she has, portrayed them to share with their family members, just to tell them a little bit more about their everyday. So the last topic I wanted to wrap up around is democratizing design techniques. And the two methods that you've seen in this presentation are really things that can be applied by anybody, not necessarily coming from design. And what we're doing in the healthcare education strategy group right now is to take the method that Ina showed and to turn it into templates. Here is a guide that we have made, how do you find the person to talk with, what type of questions that you can ask, and a template that people can fill. They can always change it, but also a very thorough consent form that we made in order for people to share. So I'm quite excited about, sharing these methods and democratizing across people from different disciplines. So that's it.
Super. Thank you for that. I love that, democratizing your techniques. So, of course, this is a great way of showing some tangible ways of empowering. I'm going to invite Dom to share a few techniques that you're using as well. So thank you for that, Cansu.
Of course, my pleasure.
So I figured that I would, how do I put this? There's obviously a lot of techniques that we go through, and but there was one that we use, a tool basically that we use from the very beginning of a project, and I realized we basically use it all the way to the end of a project. And it's very simple. It's just the kind of lowly hand sketch. And it's become more and more important in the office as we go along or as we develop. I think part of it is in response to as tools get more digitized, as tools get more sophisticated, it's really helpful for us to balance it out with very non-sophisticated, very immediate way of communicating. And the sketches are used from anything from kind of a big abstract concept. This is a sketch that I did at another talk a few years ago, picturing a future city. It was something that purposely I did again with Virgil and kind of zoomed him in and did it in 15 minutes. And the idea was, could you redesign a city in 15 minutes? So it goes from everything from very big abstract stuff to very kind of like, this is us trying to design a sink spout for a house. And I'm sure none of this is surprising to any designer. Obviously, using a hand sketch is nothing new. But one thing that I think we found really useful about it is not only, it's basically the most immediate way that we can capture an idea, get an idea from our heads down onto something visible and onto a piece of paper. Oftentimes at the beginning of a project where we're trying to capture an abstract idea, and sometimes it translates quite directly towards the end of a project. Again, for example, this is a concept sketch for that bathhouse I mentioned in the Caribbean. Sometimes it's really just a really easy way to communicate to the other person on the other side of the table the big idea. So in this case, treating this garden like a giant hedge and starting to carve out spaces within that hedge for this bathhouse. Oftentimes it's actually, I would call technical, although obviously we'll get much more technical than this, but really just a workout problem. So in this case, we're working on elevational problems as we moved around this museum ring in this museum proposal, the different floor levels, where the entrances were, how you access the site, and again, very quickly. And oftentimes I think one of the key things about it is that, sort of like how I mentioned earlier, it can lay down an idea early on that's actually more intuitive than it is necessarily certainly fleshed out. And that can help to carry through the entire project. In this example with that stage for Kanye, it was, you can see all the different variants. We went through hundreds of different variations on the stage. And I remember ending up at this on the left. And it was actually quite shocking when we showed up at the first concert and saw the final result of the stage and saw how similar it was. But it was actually obviously very helpful to have to go through a lot of different iterations very, very quickly. As you can imagine, especially with an event and with someone like Kanye, things move way too quickly to do kind of proper design studies. With something like the pool, almost the opposite happened, where the idea came in the sketch form super early, and it actually helped maintain a consistency as the project developed, as the site moved around, as different iterations were created and installed, and finally obviously leading to the end product, or hopefully the end product. You know, obviously there are some variations. For example, in the view on screen, you can see we had to add a second bridge for egress, but it's maintained a consistency that's oftentimes very hard to do, and you can rely on that initial mark on paper as a reference point. But I think what I find the most important part about it is, I think oftentimes design is thought of as a very linear process, you know, again, from research to drawing to fabrication to realization. And it's really not. Obviously, you're constantly going back and forth with your partners, with your collaborators, and being able to constantly, again, get that idea on the table and something that they can respond to and see very visually and very viscerally and very quickly, we find really, really key, not only again for communication, but for us to actually see if our ideas may sound amazing when we're talking about them, but may look terrible once you actually make it tangible. And the sketch is carried out. It carries out through the entire process in ways that I'm really happy that we do. And it's also one thing that I think it's interesting to see in the studio, people developing a sketching technique as they stay longer and longer in the studio. People that were very uncomfortable with their own hand are suddenly very, very used to it by 6 months in. So again, it's a very simple tool, but I like that it's also very universal. Clients can sketch along with us. And it's very friendly, I guess, in that way. And I think that's actually quite helpful.
Wow, great. I mean, this is also just like, I love the fact that, yeah, it's almost sort of chiming against the sort of digitalized tools that we have. And, this is, the kind of simplest craft form, if you could say, with the sketches. And I love hearing that your clients are also sketching along too. So this is also a really good way of collaborating too, right? Great. So, I mean, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask the three of you to basically give us some tips. We're talking about design to improve life, obviously, in these 10 days. And of course, when you're designing with a mission in focus, and plus Paul or Laerdal solutions here, it demands a type of imagination, and it demands, taking big, bold risks. We heard that in one of the earlier sessions where we were discussing with investors and startups. I mean, it's just really interesting that we're hearing the same kind of like terminology being being used in these sessions. Can I ask the three of you, the two of you, to just name some concrete tips for how you would design for impact? I'm going to start with you, Cansu.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I think I'll just, refer back to some of the topics we've discussed earlier, starting with, being open and actively inviting and empowering your users and participants to design with you. And I think also some of the things that you showed, Dong, you empowering your users with and clients with sketching techniques to help them design with you. These are really going to strengthen and enrich the design process going forward. The second tip could be the transparency side, the way you document, the way you move about the design process, the way you store the concepts. It's about being transparent with the people that you work with and the partners that we work with. And you would be surprised how, interested and how receptive people are in being part of that design journey when they have a better view of the process itself. And the final thing, I know it's COVID and stuff, but to get out of the office, to get out of the buildings that we're in, and to observe people.
Well, thank you for that. So being open, actively empowering, designing with your partners, having transparency, and then getting out there, just going, seeing, living. What about you, Dom?
I was going to say the last point, especially getting out of the office, opening that door, opening that window. I think super highlighted all of last year, still into this year, especially as we miss even just seeing friends and kind of greeting the neighborhood like you normally would. But even, obviously socially, it means just kind of going to places that are not closed up and kind of maybe a little bit uncomfortable for you. I would say one kind of tangible technique that we use all the time in the office, or we say all the time in the office, is basically just putting the ugly shit on the table. And I think especially when you're designing to improve life, when you're trying to do very complex things, whether they're social justice issues, whether they're environmental issues, they're very difficult issues to hit well. I think we can all think of projects that suddenly were plopped into the world and didn't really do what they claimed to do. The wording behind it, the tagline doesn't quite fit with the product. And I think you have to go through a lot of designs, let's say, that are just terrible. Either they look terrible, they don't work, the layouts don't work, the usages is not what it's doing, and be very upfront with putting those on the table in order to move past them. And obviously accepting critique along the way. I think it's counterproductive to approach it like the sort of genius designer that I'm going to have the right answer and it's going to come to you at the very end and don't worry about things. And that really rarely ever works well. It doesn't let collaborators input. It doesn't allow you to work with other people very well. But also, I kind of think like your ideas, maybe you may have a good idea, but your output may be absolutely crap. So like, let's get through that and transform it into something that's useful and actually works like it's supposed to work. So yeah, just putting the ugly stuff on the table from day one, and knowing that can only help, and getting over that hurdle is really, really key.
Brilliant. I hear some resonance in that, putting the ugly stuff on the table and just maybe the stuff that's really, really uncomfortable, and facing the reality of the human, the human life. It's messy, it's imperfect. And it also kind of like resonates with the technique you showed earlier, Cansu, like showing these imperfect diaries, trying to understand, actually that we aren't presenting our perfect selves all the time. So I'm really delighted to hear that just in this discussion that, whilst being designers and of course, seeking the answers in our process, we're also showing, the messy, frustrating, uncomfortable parts of it. And maybe that's also adding to the creativity. I think this is all we have time for today. I would like to thank the both of you. Dong in New York. I loved seeing your little walk to the studio. Now I got that visual map of where you're getting your coffee, where you're having your dumplings, what inspires you in your morning walk to work. And Cansu, your maker studio, it doesn't look messy at all. We look forward to being able to see it one day. Thank you so much for sharing and for your really inspiring inputs today. That's all we have time for. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Cansu.
Thank you for having us. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
I really hope you enjoyed this one and found some inspiration for your own design processes. Tomorrow, we're going to celebrate the designing youth and hear from 3 Latin American designers who are part of our own Design or Responde challenge. See you then.